So again, welcome to the Room Management Roundtable. We do this twice a month and on the second Tuesday and the fourth Tuesday. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the state of adaptive paddling from one person's perspective who has been involved with this area of paddle sports for a long, long, long time. There aren't, you can see it's not a huge crowd, so we'll invite you to ask questions whenever you want to, but please keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question, but feel free to jump in if there's something that's not clear or you want repeated. And like I said, twice monthly we do these. And if you're not familiar with River Management Society, our members have in common that we all work on rivers and otherwise are quite varied in our disciplines or areas of expertise. And we are welcoming today Kevin Carr, the founder of Creating Ability. So Kevin, I'm going to let you, after one more thing, just you guys, again, besides muting, just try to be respectful of other folks' opinions and comments, and we will be happy at the end of the session. So now, Kevin, you're on.
All right, thanks, Risa. Risa and I go back a long ways in the paddle sports world. My name is Kevin Carr. I am the owner of Creating Ability, chief bottle washer. I mean, you name it, it's been my title here. Basically, what it comes down to is that I've been designing adaptations to include people in all kinds of sports, but focusing mostly on water sports like kayaking and canoeing for almost 20 years. This has been my full-time job. It's the most incredible job I've ever had because there is a real joy in being able to solve a problem. I love problem solving, and in this case, mechanical problem solving for the most part. And when you're working in a group of people that have disabilities, the list of problems to solve is endless. So this is an ongoing, fertile field for me to be able to look at a problem, try to come up with an elegant, simple solution for it, and move on. And the benefit in doing that is that it reaches people um, who have a list of problems to be solved. In the case of kayaking, when we solve that problem, we're creating a level of freedom that doesn't exist when you're in the chair. So as we go through here, you'll see a few of the slides. One of my talking about how the chairs are empty and the boats are full, and you can't tell whose chairs those are. So what we've been doing for almost 20 years is creating that mechanical bridge from someone's chair into an environment that allows them to be like everyone else. That outreach has occurred vastly through nonprofits and the VA and large programs who are mostly 501c3s, whose goal is to create adaptive sports and include people in those sports with a goal towards giving people independence. But the structure of that is really important because as a manufacturer and as an educator, it gives me a group to reach out to that gets the most exposure for one session, for example. We've got nationwide programs, actually worldwide. We've got programs in Australia, New Zealand, Italy, England, Ireland. There's all kinds of people out doing adaptive paddling and using our equipment. So when we educate, we're teaching program instructors how to work with the general public and how to educate individuals. Well, along comes COVID, and that entire system evaporated. It shut down. Everybody closed the doors and said, we can't do this. If you think about it, someone transferring from a wheelchair into a kayak if you're assisting them with that transfer by helping lift them, you're not going to do it from 6 feet away. And all programming just came to a complete halt. And understand, I've been to all 48 states driving, putting on an average of 40,000 miles a year, being the Johnny Appleseed of adaptive paddling. So when COVID happened, all of the programs shut down, and everyone who was being served by those programs lost service. Um, and when you think about it, if kayaking is one place where you can be like everybody else, during COVID, to have that disappear is a double whammy on someone who is forced to isolate and forced to not experience freedom in the way they're used to. So what's happened is that when people lost their programs, they reached out to try to find us and say, listen, if I can't attend the program, I'm going to get a grant myself and find a way to buy my own boat, which is awesome. I mean, really, it's the intent of everything from the start is to get people more independent and give them that ability to go out with their family. This forced the issue. So for us, it stopped the travel, it stopped the ability to create a fleet of kayaks and made everything a one at a time encounter, which is very difficult. I mean, it's 10 times the work and a tenth of the cost to us is being lost. Um, so we've had to adjust how we do things. And the cool part in that is that during this time, during the last 3 years or so, the level of infrastructure that's appearing on our waterways is skyrocketing. The number of people that are putting in accessible docks, I use the air quotes on accessible. We'll talk about that more later. But this is a booming time for the dock folks because they are making inroads to saying, listen, this is really something you need to do to provide this service for inclusion for anyone with a disability. Um, so the struggle becomes, how do you get the people to the site? How do people manage on their own or with family members where a program used to make that happen before? And how do we consult with the customer to get them set up properly? Now, everything that we do, and you're looking at one of our kayaks there, so the seating in the kayak has lateral support, has no core stability at all, is stabilized by the seat, and then the boat is stabilized by the outer back. So we can create the environment for the person, but the education of the person is limited. Uh, and the sport has risks. I mean, kayaking has risks to start with, but if you're missing function, for example, in your hands, and your boat flips over, how do you know how to escape the boat, get to the surface, and be rescued? And how does that rescue happen if there's no support structure in place like the programs would provide? Um, I think you probably get an idea of the level of challenge that the last few years have presented. Um, an added frustration as I watch is I see the investment happening in docks and what you're seeing here is a dock actually from my hometown in Illinois. And I'm not going to go into details of this dock is better than that dock, but I would rather just be able to say, as you're putting in and installing the infrastructure that it takes for someone with a disability to paddle, this would be an example of how not to do it. If you notice, the ramp that the boat would go out goes into a mud bank. Um, this is a small river and it wasn't maintained. So everyone that's doing infrastructure on rivers knows what happens when you have a part of your structure in moving water. Um, it can lead to bad things, and this dock is an example of a lot of money spent poorly and not maintained. So if you go to the next slide, Risa, um, this is this is unfair. Okay, I'll admit this right up front because we're going from a muddy creek in Illinois to a beautiful lake in Pennsylvania. Um, but this photo really shows how it can work if you do it right. This is a beautifully designed dock, a beautifully designed system, and a wonderful installation. I took this shot, so it's at Leaser Lake in Pennsylvania. And if you see the how clean it looks, how beautiful this thing is, the most beautiful aspect of this picture is the chairs on the dock sitting there empty and the lake full of kayaks. And I would dare any one of you to look at those boats on the water and tell me who used one of those chairs. You can't. It's virtually invisible. And to the person in a chair who is looking up at people all day, who's looking for the curb cut out because you have to, you can't just pop up a curb, who can't go into an old restaurant because the doors aren't wide enough, when you get the ability to get into a kayak and be on water, all of a sudden it's what you remember life being. So there is power in this photo. Uh, there's a lot of structure going on because what it takes to move from a wheelchair to a kayak is a mechanical bridge to speak of. For someone who can self transfer, uh, the whole idea is how do we get them from the chair onto the water? Uh, and a dock like that last one can actually make that happen. What you're about to see is Risa's going to launch the YouTube video. And this is my friend Cody, who is a T3 para, meaning he is paralyzed at the third vertebrae down in the thoracic region. So roughly above the nipples. Okay, so he's got good shoulders and arms and not much core, and transfers every day. So the system that he's using is what we developed to make this possible anywhere. Um, there it goes. There's nothing to hear here except some badly canned music, but hopefully this works for folks. I hope it's working smoother for everyone else than it is for me. So Cody just transferred onto the transfer bench, which allows him to slide over the seat in the kayak at the same level that his chair was at. And once he's over the seat, he lifts up, we pull the board out, and he lowers himself down into the seat. That's as jerky for everyone else as it is for me. I'm sorry. But you kind of get the idea. It's a very smooth level transfer that isn't creating a hazard for him. Then being on the chariot, uh, okay, it just went to transferring out. So the boat being on wheels allows someone to roll Cody down a bank into the water with the wheels on the kayak, and then the wheels float off after he's on the water. So we don't have to lift him. There's no infrastructure that has to be in place. All we need is a path to the water. And something like a boat ramp works just great. A sandy beach is excellent. Um, any kind of access to the water that isn't a drop off, this can create the ability to put him on the water. And then also be able to get him off the water, bring him back to his chair in a level place like a parking lot or in the shade or, any place that is really convenient for the transfer uh, and get him back to his chair safely. So any of the dock systems that you see are replicating pieces of that, uh, by giving a path to the kayak that the person can transfer across. What you're seeing now is the National Veterans Summer Sports Clinic in San Diego, where we set up the system and we're doing the transfers at the top of this sandy beach where it's a paved, shaded area, and then rolling the participants down the sand and into the water. So the picture on the left is a single guy rolling the paddler down to the water. The picture on the right is how you get a larger paddler up a steep sandy beach by just tying off two belay points, and up we go. And if you can see the face of the guy in the kayak, uh, he is just having a ball. And then once you get him up to the transfer station, everything is up to him from there, and it's a very easy transfer. Um, so this is what we've tried to do to open the world up before the infrastructure is available. You know, before you've got the funds available to do the installation, to create the access to the water, this creates the access for you. Um, and that's really where I come from as far as trying to make these things happen. About 3 years ago, just before COVID, um, the paddle share program was started by Susan Overson with the National Park Service up in St. Paul, and they utilize this, which is basically a rental locker that's full of kayaks. So each of those drawers on the end is access to a kayak. So there's 8 boats in this locker. And they've positioned these along the Mississippi River in St. Paul. And you go online and rent a kayak for a certain number of hours at a certain cost. It gives you a code that works for a certain number of hours. You go down to the river, you punch in the code, you pull out your boat, you paddle down the river to the next station and get out. And in most cases, they have an e-bike available on site there that you can ride back to the put in. Really cool system. And it requires maintenance, and it requires a paddling program, in this case, kind of a paddling outfitter that monitors where the boats are and makes sure they get back to their original starting point. It's kind of like the rental car industry. You have to get the boat back to where you started. Um, Works really cool. It also hit a major road bump with COVID because how do you make all of that safe? In the meantime, Susan had the idea to make one of the units adaptive. So they got a hold of me. We created 8 adapted kayaks for that station. And with our equipment, when you pull all the equipment off, it's a kayak. So it enables you to use the kayaks for adaptive use or for standard use. And what they did was rather than putting it on the river, they put it on a small lake just off of the river, um, which is a great idea. But the problem is it has no supervision. There's no lifeguard. There's no safety of any kind on. There's no staff on the lake at all. There was also no infrastructure for people with disabilities. There was no water. There was no toilet facility. They did their best. They brought in an adaptive porta potty, um, but basically it was an unsupported site, uh, which really tied the hands of the unit. Uh, what we ended up doing, so at that same time, I was doing education with everyone involved, um, and we ended up using the locker like a uh, a program supplier. So, Alina Health, for example, what used to be Courage Kenny, would hold a Saturday event and they would rent the whole locker and pull the boats out and have an adaptive event with their participants. The city of St. Paul did the same thing with some of their adaptive sports programming. Um, and it's an okay use, but it doesn't accomplish the main goal, which was to create that independence in a more diverse way for individuals rather than making it another program based opportunity. And then of course all the programs shut down. So that has not seen its fruition the way we all hoped it would. It's beginning to get back into shape, but it's also been a really good case study for the next group that wants to try to do something like this on what's necessary. And the challenge for all of us is how to staff something like this, how to accomplish the training for something like this, and make sure that everything is in place to ensure the safety of the paddlers to get this going. So I would call this a work in process. Uh, and the beauty of it is the ability to put people on the water. The risk of it is, what happens if um, in the normal program, in the river program, if somebody decides to go from microbrewery to microbrewery, and on the third microbrewery they flip their boat, there isn't generally a great consequence to that if they're wearing the life jacket and doing what they're told. If you add disability into the mix, there needs to be a deeper level of understanding of the risks and some training in place for the people who want to participate. Um, so how we incorporate that is really the challenge we face. So if you look at all of the list of things that I just rambled through, uh, the physical infrastructure takes a lot of planning, takes a lot of education, um, and I would encourage anyone who is going down that path, who's looking to incorporate docks into their structure, uh, that you bring in people with disabilities. Don't just listen to people like me. Get a hold of the organizations, get a hold of the rehabs, and listen to the people in chairs who say, "Hey, listen, I'm going to need this if this is going to be a success for me." And then we need to work on what the needs are from an education standpoint to get this supported, because now there's a wave of paddlers um, getting their own equipment and being able to do this. And you can picture a paddler with the transfer bench and the chariot in the back of their van, and they and a family member are launching off into the lake and just having a great time. So that's the challenge I would lay out there, is to say, now how do we go make that happen? And who do we involve in that process? And I'll raise my hand first and say, hey, when you're going down that path, pull me in. I'm more than happy to help out and offer whatever help I can, uh, including looking at the details of what the installation would be and how to make it the most effective it can be. I think, yeah, we're getting towards the end of the program here. Um, the If you look at this picture, okay, you'd say, look, there's a guy with great shoulders in a kayak on a lake. This guy's name is Taylor Morris, and he was ordnance disposal in Afghanistan and got blown up, and he's missing all four limbs. So he's lost both legs and both arms. Uh, and this picture was taken in Maine, and he's out paddling. So being able to do the outfitting, we got that covered. We can definitely make the outfitting happen now. We've got the tools, we've got the parts. The launch elements is where the people in this group can become a bigger piece of the puzzle and say, hey, okay, we can provide you a way to get that equipment onto water, do it safely. Um, and partner up with the programs, because now all the programs are coming back and they're struggling to get their footing. They've been funded the last 2 or 3 years, and their funding is based on how many people did you get on the water. So they have a great need to get people on the water, get their numbers back up, and keep the flow of grant money coming. So there's great opportunity there. And instructors, I'm an instructor trainer in the ACA, and we see a lot of the the folks who want to be involved in this. I'm seeing a great number of therapists and people involved in rehab wanting to become kayakers rather than kayakers wanting to become involved with adaptive paddling. Um, but there's some of both. So there are so many different pools to be reached out into to bring people into this equation and make it work beautifully. Um, so I think I'm done yammering at this enough to say, you know, what are your thoughts? What do you see? What have you had exposure to, and what do you see that needs attention, and what do you see that can be done better, and what do you see that's being done right? What are the success stories? And if you've got those things, I think this would be a great time to talk about it.
Yeah, so if folks would just like to share, what if you're a river manager, you may not be running a program yourself, but you might have discussed with your colleagues or those who manage your facilities how to accommodate those with special needs, or you may have partners who are conducting programs. So if you might have good experiences or not great experiences or priorities, but you haven't figured out how to best implement them. So we'd love to hear from you. We have a great variety of folks with great experience from what I can tell from the sign up.
And I'm a
Anyone
little
want
bit at a loss there because I haven't met any of you, and I don't even see you on my screen right now, so I'm a little bit in the dark on the discussion.
Okay, let me stop sharing and then if anyone would just like to I can call on folks or you don't have to raise your hand or anything. Just chime in if you'd like to share about what's going on with your program or on your river in your department, in your agency. I know many of you have great programs going on. Coulter, I see your hand. Hey.
Yeah, hi there. For sharing purposes, and then if the speaker or anyone in the audience has something to give us feedback on, I would appreciate that feedback. So on the Three Forks of the Flathead, we are working with several partners to address accessibility in our river system, and it is likely to include an information package about the degree of accessibility at our river sites, knowing that some sites we aren't sure we can improve on accessibility, so providing the information of what the grade is, what features are or are not present there, um, so that a person with who needs that information can use that to inform their visit. And I guess so. As I said, that's an approach we are taking here. And if anyone has anything that relates to that, we'd be interested in hearing from others around that approach.
Coulter, what's an example of how you describe a facility? What's the nature
Yeah,
of that?
yeah, like the slope of the launch, whether it's high gradient, low gradient, but the actual degree of the slope and the extent of the run there. Is there accessible parking? Is there not? Is the outhouse accessible or not? What is the material subsurface? Is it a paved launch? Is it a sandy launch? Things like that.
Is there anything about the launch within the water? Okay, so the path leading to the water is measurable, but what about the surface, subsurface? Like for example, if you said, okay, this is a boat ramp, it's cement, and we know that everything cement just underwater is coated with slime and slipperier than you know what. Is there anything that quantifies what the entry to the water is?
Yeah, we hadn't thought about that, so we'll work on that aspect. So you're suggesting focusing on all, including the what's below the water line. I think that's a tough question because that changes through the year too,
Mhm.
where that water line is.
Right. and being on the river rather than being on a lake, it changes daily, right?
Yeah, that could be like not so much caution, but advice to be something to be aware of versus what is, because it changes so much.
The reason I ask is just the system that I showed you for launching someone in the chariot requires the person assisting to walk into the water. So, if your access is a sandy beach, you're walking into the water on sand. No big deal. If the access is, like I said, a cement ramp into the water, then it requires care to not slip on what's subsurface, and that would be really hard to quantify.
Coulter, it seems like your approach is pretty awesome. One
Right.
thing that we've been advised or have heard about providing accessible access is to ask the people who are interested to take responsibility for what they can and can't do. So you can't know that about someone, but you can tell them what is there. They could choose to go there and not go someplace downstream or upstream based on what you've said. So, gosh, it sounds certainly a great start, but it sounds really great. And just as an example, someone who has difficulty um, with their mobility is really different than someone who's blind. Their needs are just different. Something some of those accessible benches are a trip hazard and awful for someone who's blind. Just as an example, I hadn't
Or
thought about it until someone who would be affected like that was advising against just saying, "Oh yeah, we can help you get into your kayak or something like that."
well, really anything that is a river system where you're going from a put in to a takeout. If you think about, how does the person with a wheelchair function at the takeout if their wheelchair is at the put in? What does it take to have the same structure at the takeout that you had at the put in? If you have an accessible dock at the put in but not at the takeout, what does that do to the process the person has to go through? What's the planning for that? So to be able to look at that online and say, well, I see it, and it's got this slope at the takeout, it's got this slope at the put in, the person at least has a really nice handle on what they're looking at before they get to the takeout, right?
I have a question for Kevin. Raise hands was Duncan.
Kevin, you raised an interesting point because we kind of grappled with this on New York's canal system that with put-ins and takeouts, you also have to have a way of getting the person's chair and probably their hand-controlled van from one location to another, and so we've looked at several places where there's a good possibility for an accessible launch, but then you ask, who's going to use this and how are they going to use it? Is it going to be an out and back, very much like a lake or a pond situation, or is it going to be a long distance paddle? Because that brings in a whole nother set of logistical requirements for the paddler and the people who are accompanying them.
Yep. Excellent.
And we never came up with an answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what did you say when you asked that question of yourself?
Well, I mean, we've done a couple of instances, and I learned how to drive a hand control van, but that doesn't work for people who want to be fully independent. Um,
Right. And not everybody is willing to let someone jump into their hand control van and drive it to
exactly.
the takeout either. Kind of like if you have a power chair, who's responsible for getting the power chair to a safe place while paddling? Um, so do you know Anita O'Brien then out in the Erie Canal?
Yeah, we work with her a lot.
Yeah. Okay. We go way back.
Yeah.
So I'm enjoying what I see happening on the canal. I mean, that's one of the places where I see a lot of really nice things going on.
Yeah. Yeah, let me add to the chat. We just did hand launch guidelines just about a year ago for the canal system. And while it doesn't focus entirely on accessibility, it, it's a big component. And the other issue that we sort of faced in that is maintenance of those, because we see a lot of these that were put in with all the best intentions and they become horrible debris traps for floating vegetation and logs and what have you, which then becomes an invitation to vandalism and things go downhill from there. So a lot of it has to do with simply orientation to the current. You know, where how could you put this thing in that it's going to tend to shed floating debris and make it accessible at the same time.
And be maintainable.
Mhm. Hey, Carl, you're unmuted. You want to share something? I just see that you're unmuted. Except we can't hear you.
And frozen, yeah.
And frozen. Anyone else?
So another quick thought on the dock, and this is from a program standpoint. When the dock system has so much stuff on it, it can actually get in the way of adaptive use. If someone does need an assist to be transferred from a chair to a boat, if there is so much stuff on the dock, it makes that almost impossible. So, in many instances, there are some really cool things going on with dock structures, but there are also some things that are just kind of throwing stuff in the way, and they work for a very small percentage of people. So you can use the it's one of my pet peeves, but there is no such thing as an ADA compliant dock because docks are not mentioned in the ADA. So that in itself is not a great terminology. Um, but to make something truly accessible, what does that take, and who are you making it accessible for? Who are the people you're trying to reach? And that's where at the onset, um, it's really important to include groups that could be that targeted group that says we want to include you in this and see what's important to them.
Have any folks on that's great, Kevin. That's probably the wisest thing to take away. So, know your audience is pretty basic, but everyone can ask and be a lot smarter by asking the people who are those you're going to try to serve. Is anyone working on a project of a launch or an expansion or a construction where they are just beginning or a little confused or confounded or not sure what to include or how to design?
I'm not working on a project. I'm listening with like real interest to this, and Risa will know I just asked a question having to do with some inclusivity for paddling events. And I have to admit, I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around sort of how to use some of the information that you've been sharing. The organization I work for provides small grants to other organizations that lead paddling trips. And we keep trying to say that over the years, we're kind of seeing the same people sign up for the events. And one of the things we're trying to do is say, hey, the idea here is that we want to get different different people out there. It's a fully logistically planned event and, everything. But I guess it just seems like not only the launches, but the logistics, the equipment, it just doesn't. I'm trying to think about how we could encourage these organizations to make these, we call them sojourns, more inclusive, but there seems to be so many logistics, and we give a very small grant, right? So there's not very many caveats we can put on there, but it just sounds like every piece of equipment is so specialized. We can't say like, hey, make sure you have at least 10 paddles that help with adaptive paddling, right? I mean, it's not that simple. Um, so I don't know. I don't really have a question here. I mean, I think it's fascinating, but I'm trying to figure out how to apply it or think about, the outfitters that our organizations work with. It just seems like the equipment's so specialized. You can't just say like, make sure you have at least one adaptive boat and two adaptive paddles, right? That's
Yeah.
obviously going to be meaningless.
Wouldn't
So,
wouldn't that be great? I'd
right,
love,
I know. I don't expect it to be that easy. I really don't.
yeah,
I'm trying to take what you're saying and say, or we also fund like what we have a Pennsylvania River of the Year program, and we give a pretty nice grant, and we expect the organizations that win the River of the Year to host a number of different events. And I'm even thinking to myself, could we strongly encourage the organization that wins the Pennsylvania River of the Year to think about hosting one event that's an adaptive paddling event? But even planning for that, we can't say, I have no idea if that river is going to have any access points that even make it possible, even if
yeah.
I,
And the Pennsylvania River of the Year. Think about that. If it's the River of the Year and you can't access it if you have a disability, how is it the River of the Year? Right?
I should think about that.
Um, yeah,
I was gonna
Could be a
suggest,
criteria.
yeah, I was gonna suggest make it a criteria. That would
yeah.
change
Part
your
of the criteria.
group of applicants.
So to what you just said, though, I can throw in some understanding of the dilemma, uh, because anytime you're trying to get the information out there and you say, okay, so here's our organization that does a lot of adaptive paddling, but it does tend to be the same 5 or 6 people all the time. There is a lot of work that goes into making those things happen. And a great number of these organizations are all volunteer based. So you're looking at an event that takes a great deal of physical effort along with a commitment of a lot of time. And I think one of the attempts of the locker program up in the cities was to at least have the equipment on site. Because if you think about it, you need the specialized equipment to show up for the event. Well, then you have to have a trailer full of specialized event equipment with a half a dozen people who are knowledgeable in the equipment and know how to take it out, put it back in, and they're there 2 hours before the event and 3 hours after the event, and then have to go home and clean and fix whatever got broken. So it is a huge challenge. Um, and honestly, beyond the struggle of the physical, is to find a way to communicate the beauty of being able to do it. And a lot of where we get I don't market at all. I don't spend, you'll never see an ad from us because the people that get excited about it are the ones that market it. So, I go even beyond the organizations to the participants and say, hey, listen, if you're participating in the event and this is something that really was great, then you need to share this. Come on, be a part of this. Tell the people because the community of disability is powerful, and it's
Holly,
hard to.
yeah, I'm brainstorming, but an adaptive event doesn't need to be 9 people paddling 9 adaptive boats.
Right.
And it could incorporate some, 2 boats or a percentage or a healthy effort to extend yourself as a group to the adaptive needs community. So, you know, I don't know how you make that a bar to overcome, or I mean a criteria, but something that's sort of baby steps. Because the events that we saw that Kevin showed pictures of, they're all in. There are groups that do this all the time, and for every person who you know, is in a wheelchair, there's usually a volunteer or two who can help built into the group. So outside of that,
Actually, I'd like to expand on what you just said. That we have this blanket definition of disability. Um, I'm 63. I'm coming into an age where I don't get out of a kayak like I used to. I've got rheumatoid arthritis. All of my boomer friends and I are becoming the major group. And I'll step outside of the rivers for just a second, where I see this very clearly. I've got a 21-year-old daughter with Down syndrome who's nonverbal, and we ride trikes together. They interlock with each other. The fork of the bike behind goes into the bike in front, and we go hit the bike trails. And she doesn't contribute much. And my wife is 67. I'm 63. 2 years ago, we added e-drive to her bike. This year, I added it to mine. I never thought I'd see the day, and I did it. And I tell you what, when I go to a bike trail now on a Thursday noon, because we pedal out to a pie shop, okay? All of a sudden, the trails are packed with people our age that are all gray haired and all riding e bikes. So, this whole e bike movement has extended the sport into our 60s, 70s, and even 80s by that one technological advance. So, how do we do that in paddle sports on rivers, right? Even more than okay, I get the mechanical aspect of someone who has a spinal cord injury, but it's so much broader than that. And I know it
couple of,
doesn't answer any questions, it creates more. So,
hey Bev, you have a question? I see your hand.
I wanted to thank you all for this a lot. I'm not a river paddler, I'm a lake paddler, but I work for a paddle shop in central North Carolina, and we just added adaptive paddling to our program programming. And I think I sent you an email recently. You wrote me back. Thank you very much. Um, but so this summer was the first summer getting into it. I was able to get endorsement through it and fantastic. I think uh, because we're just getting started, we don't have it yet. We're using our existing boats or the local city boats. When people sign up for a specific event, I call them, interview them, find out what needs are and whether we need to meet ahead of time or not, which I haven't had to meet anybody ahead of time yet. But I guess my point is we haven't needed adaptive equipment yet, but again, we're just getting started, and we have the whole year to figure out how we can pay for some adaptive equipment so we can have it ready for next year. So we are a for-profit company, so the cities are expressing interest in purchasing some equipment through their budget on their land, which is great. But then that limits that we, the place we can go. So it's been a learning curve, and really what we're doing next year, I don't know that if anybody has any suggestions. I love it being a newbie at this, but anyway. Um, I think my biggest concern is the safety issue because when people play basketball or do other sports, if they fall or if there is an issue, um, they can still breathe. But and I think Kevin's comment that safety really needs to be addressed strongly because if somebody falls in a boat, I mean, yes, they're going to be on, but there's so many different um, either getting them back to the boat or keep them to rescue, or it's not like you have a flat tire and you get out of your car and you can still breathe. But if you have an issue with your boat, you, there's a lot more to think about. So that's part of my take home message today is kayaks are cute and they're fun and they look like a toy, but a lot of people that are jumping into it basically aren't thinking about what happens if there is a problem on the water. And I think that's where our role comes in, is education.
Very much
So,
true. That's right on. I lost about half of what you were saying from cutting out. I
oh,
afraid it was mine, but I got the gist. But even
okay.
a few words can add up to the right idea. Um, and really, what you're talking about is spot on. The education is the first thing. It's not the boats. You need to know what the risks are and how to mitigate those risks. How do you
Mhm.
rescue a boat that has outriggers on it? It's not a standard procedure. Um, and having that in place is really important. That's kind of why the brakes got tapped on the St. Paul program, was that those safety concerns were not addressed.
Mhm.
And if they're not addressed, we can't proceed. So where you started is the right place to start. And not everybody needs the full outfitted kayak, right? Um, it's just the universal design goal that says I can use this boat for everybody. So starting that program, there's something when we teach, it's called the EEC, which is Essential Eligibility Criteria, that says if you're going to participate in this program, here are the things you must be able to do. For example, you have to be able to close your lips and seal your airway. You have to be able to prove to me that you can turn from face down to face up in the water if you're wearing a life jacket. And some of those things need to be met to proceed with programming, to advance the program. Um, and that's where it starts getting complicated. If you're a program and you say you have to meet this requirement, well, then are you holding pool sessions all winter to train people so that when they get on the water in the spring, they've got the skill set because you've taught them how to do it? Um, and it's a big investment, huge. And I'm talking time, not just money, but it's a huge time investment. So good for you for doing it. That's awesome. I don't want to miss that point. That's every time I hear we do this and we're starting to add, that's fantastic because you're in the right place to be.
So I need to help out a little. Bev, what's your company name and where are you guys located? You said North Carolina.
We're in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Hmm.
So we work with the city of Greensboro. We're about so we're looking for all people in those areas. And right now, excuse me.
I don't know about other folks. I can't hear. I heard was Greensboro.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
Yeah.
all I got was Greensboro also, and which makes me smile because I just got an email from the city of Greensboro, so it's working.
yeah, yeah. They just bought a pivot from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Um, okay, Greensboro. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so we're with Point, Winston-Salem, and then we are an hour from Raleigh, an hour from Charlotte.
Okay.
So
There's
What,
a
we're
what's
hoping
the
people
name of your company?
get outdoors, pedal
Oh.
and paddle,
Hmm.
kayaking like shop.
there's an organization in Raleigh, Durham, called Bridge to Sports.
Right.
I
Wes Hall was with.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Is he with you now?
No, he's starting his own entity,
Cool,
Adaptive Sports Carolina. I do
cool.
know him. He
Yeah,
assisted in
I
the.
I do too. I've known Wes a long time, and
Yeah.
That was a great loss for him to not be at Ridge to Sports.
Yes, yes, but he's gonna do other things now, and he'll be successful wherever he goes.
Oh, he will. That's a sharp guy. Yeah.
Yep, yeah.
Well, good luck with that. Um, it's a great company. We,
If I can
Kevin and
help,
I both, Kevin and
Stacy.
I both know the guy who started it, Andy Zimmerman. He still
Yeah.
lives in Greensboro.
Yeah,
Um,
yes.
yeah. So we're
And
getting
that's,
towards
oh,
the end of the hour. If there are any other questions, I want to just share a couple of things before we leave, and also um, you're I might show you a survey that says, please fill out the survey. I'm going to send it tomorrow just to get your feedback on the session. And because Risa didn't finish putting the survey together today. We'll also send a recording for some of you folks who had arrived a little bit after we started, so you can hear the whole thing. We'll send that to you, but also it will be posted on the River Management Society's website. So in case you want to remember something that was said. But just a couple of other things before we get to the bottom of the hour. So can respect your time because we appreciate that you joined us today. Um, had to show that. So that's Kevin's, another contribution. His awesome picture. And there's the survey that we'll send to you tomorrow. But also, we have a couple of other roundtables. We have, like I said, we have 2 each month, but we're also doing, so Lisa Ronald is doing this really interesting one on what we have written in Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, Wilderness Act, a lot of things that we kind of hold as like the gold standards. And when we go through the verbiage and look at really what we assumed, we think maybe we should rewrite the Wilderness Act. So that's super interesting. And then Career Day, this is for students. So we're doing a series of four events, and we'll have some folks helping people think about their um, future. All of our training center videos are up, recordings are posted, and we hope that you come back and visit us. So that's us today. Kevin, if you Google just Kevin Carr Creating Ability, you will find him, I'm sure. And
I know we're wrapping up. Sorry. I just had a quick question. If anybody, so I'm thinking about a different disability. And again, I'm thinking about people who come to our events. Has anyone thought about when you have a paddling event, the I guess the disability I'm thinking of is like somebody that might be hard of hearing or deaf. And I'm thinking about the safety talks that we give at the beginning of our events. And I don't know that we've ever thought about whether or not everyone can hear them. And you talked about getting older, right? There's even people, at the back. I just wonder if anybody has done anything or heard of anything like a pre-recorded safety talk with an American Sign Language interpreter or something like that. I guess I'm just thinking about
yeah,
other kinds of disabilities that we might be seeing that might not be obvious when somebody shows up at an event. And I don't know if I'm sure there's elements of a safety briefing, I guess it's called a safety briefing, that would be very specific to that day. But I'm just curious if anybody has heard of, done, thought about anything like that.
I'm going to put in the chat a URL for this company and a fellow Joe Moore, who is an instructive, adaptive instructing paddling person, and he has developed a number of trainings for instructors who are paddlers doing paddling instruction, but they are geared towards, some of them are geared towards other disabilities, sight impaired and hearing impaired. So his program doesn't exactly answer your question, but the content in his trainings are for people who are going to do those kinds of classes. So he's definitely thought about it before. So maybe even from the abstracts, you get some tips.
Even from your own perspective, when you're presenting, I had someone teach this to me by embarrassing myself because I make a joke with everyone when I'm starting a program and say, okay, I need everybody to do this. And it's a joke. We're warming up our smiling muscles. And the guy in the front row said, dude, I can't see what you're doing. And it changed my style instantly because from that point on, I said, okay, take your fingers and put them on your cheeks. And I mean the ones next to your nose. So how you present what you're saying, it sometimes it takes a person who can't hear you to say, you do realize I didn't get any of that, right? And then how do you go back and reevaluate your program to make it understandable? If someone can't hear what you're saying, how do you make it more visual? Um,
Right.
that
Yeah.
like Risa said, Chuck, wow, this has been a long day. I'm pooped.
Mhm.
Joe Moore has done a lot of work on the education end of that to try to make those things more clear. So that he'd be a good guy to get in touch with.
Yeah. There was a point where on an invitation to a party, no one would ever think about asking you for your dietary restrictions. Now you always do. You always do. But, maybe someday the inclusion of a description of anything that might need special attention in a paddling class or an on-water class will include a request for specificity on what you need that might be special, um, so that the instructor or leader is prepared and doesn't have to be embarrassed into uh, restating instructions or an introduction, but you prompt the information to be shared so that you can go into it a little bit more knowledgeable and certainly make the person feel more welcome. That's a really good point, though. Well, we're a little past time, you guys, but thank you very much for joining us today. And like I said, we'll send a link and a request for you taking a couple of minutes to tell us how you viewed this session. And thanks for being here. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank, thank you.